continue to kind of review journals and stuff as they come in. If I've read it and there's a comment, then obviously you'll know that I did. But there are plenty of those that I will read and get a fix on kind of how you're processing the stuff we're talking about in class, and what's going on in your groups and things like that you're writing about, that gives me a little bit of a window in terms of the kinds of stuff I want to talk about here in class. So I think that's probably it from my end. Let me pray, and then we'll move into some of this material. Father, guide our hearts this morning. No matter where we are, what headspace we're in terms of coming into this class, we always bring something with us usually, and sometimes it's lays a window wide open for you to point to or get our attention about. I pray that we do that or allow that to happen with a base understanding of your love for us and your heart for us, in spite of whatever it might feel, and guide our discussion as we talk just about meeting people. In Jesus' name, amen. So what I want to do, at least today, and probably a little bit of next week, is actually foundational stuff for you being in groups and you in terms of interacting with people. I think it's pretty safe to say, and it sounds like, based on some of the things I'm reading, it's dawning on many of us that none of us are going to walk out of this room untouched, because everybody's had a loss. We may not have any death to a loss, but we have other losses, and that's where something like this might be helpful. The stuff I want to cover today may seem very familiar to many of you, but I thought that I'm going to highlight some things that will be relevant for y'all in groups, and then also you guys with friends. The implied kind of subtext to that is ultimately you with yourself. I think the thing to keep in mind when we talk about and look at how we interact with other people, or even how we interact with ourselves first, is generally we incorporate how we've been reacted to around losses. That we incorporate that in. So when we start dealing with our own losses, the things that we don't measure up to, or friends don't come through on, or whatever that might be, our reaction to that is what we've been taught. Now, realize that the things we've been taught are not necessarily directly communicated to us. We develop and construct a response, a lot of times built on how people just simply respond, and usually it's not with words. I mean, how often has there been a point in time where we might be feeling something very strongly, and we notice this slight upward eye roll with the person we're talking to, and immediately we say, oh, nope, this is not the place to be talking about that, or we keep charging on, hoping, like our hope is going to make them into a safe person. And that ties us to that person then, who potentially can be really pretty unsafe and damaging in terms of us having a space to reflect and talk about the things that we feel. And that's, you can take that wherever you want. I think, generally speaking, as Christians, and certainly within the academy, our tendency is to think, what words do I need to come up with for this person, rather than something else. So the question I want to kind of pose really is how do we go about setting a background? of dealing with ourselves and with others. Now realize that the way our tendency, for a while, our tendency will be that we deal with ourselves one way and somebody else another, because ultimately we think they're more worthy of that than I am by that action. But sooner or later, it begins to seep out. The nature of the stuff that I'm wrestling with, particularly around loss, and loss always tends to bring about a lot of ambivalence. We know what we should do, but we also know what we experience. And sooner or later, that will seep its way into the emotional water table, and when it does, it seeps into our relationships as well. So how do we set this background? The bigger question is, are we going to participate in comfort and consolation, or are we going to get into unintended insensitivity? And that's a key phrase. Because if we were able to get into ancient history and talk to Job's counselors, they all were well-intended. They were all well-intended. The thing that I have often said, and many of you have heard me say, is that what is portrayed in Job is a very well-established ritual within the Jewish culture. And in some other cultures, it's literally called sitting Shiva, S-H-I-V-A. And when somebody's in mourning, you sit and you just be quiet. To put it more bluntly, just shut up. And so I have often said that Job's counselors did their best work in the first 7 days until they opened their mouths. But if we were to poll them, they all went in with good intentions. They were all blown away by Job's appearance. They were all wanting to help Job. And sometimes we read that and bust their chops big time because it seems like they're being so cruel. But that's that. Unintended insensitivity. Because why? Losses and all the attending aspects to that, whether death or otherwise, tends to trigger something in us, and we want to get away from the stuff in us. So how do we go about doing that? We start with platitudes. So there's the unintended insensitivity, and when we pull back and somebody just listens and watches and we see what we're actually doing, if we were able to do that, like we do with Job's counselors, we'd say that's just downright ruthless. I mean, there's just no abating it at all. And some of it is downright not only insensitive, but just cruel, because they're implying something about Job's character in terms of how he's dealing with the loss. So what I want to do is take something, like I said, a lot of you guys, you have been exposed to this, a few of you haven't seen this, and it's just the key dimensions of relationship. I have 6 of them, but I want to highlight 4 of them, and I want to be able to apply them within this context, within the context of grief and loss, okay? And again, there's always going to be a boomerang effect in the sense of myself and others. So if you've been exposed to this is your first pop quiz. Start writing them down if you think you can remember them all. But the 6 dimensions look a little bit like this: truth and reality, and control, and boundaries, and forgiveness and reconciliation, and conflict and intimacy. The thing about these, and the reason I want to walk through these, is you walk into a group, and a group is a subset of community. So, the favorite pastime here at CCU is to bust and grouse about the community. If your group looks like the community, that's exactly why this community looks the way it does. So you want to you want to participate in some kind of transformation or quote unquote revolution in terms of the community here at CCU, do something different in your group. You've got a perfect opportunity to do that. You don't have to. I'm not going to strong arm anybody. But if we keep doing what we've always done, we will keep getting what we've always gotten. Bad English, but tough. And then the funny thing about it is, like I say, is we end up complaining about it. So where I want to start, I want to start with truth. Okay, the thing about truth, particularly in this context, is that and again, you guys have heard me talk about this. I make a split, and this is probably an even more important split when we're talking about this area, is the difference between big T truth and little t truth. And real briefly, big T truth is the stuff that is universal, it is applicable to everybody. It is stuff that God has revealed about himself, it is stuff that God has revealed about us and our relationship with each other, and even about the questions that we have in this class as far as what about after, and where's hope, and what's the nature of what does God expect? So there is big T truth. And then there's little t truth, which is unique and personal only to the person. And I'll tell you right out of the gate, and I know this, you would say, well, this is obvious, I know that. Yeah, okay, well, watch your behavior and see how well you know it. It means that you don't know it with anybody you're talking to. And if you don't know it, then you best take the stance of, help me understand, with little t truth. You can't know it. And I don't. Even with people that I've known a long, long, long time, even beyond 4 years. It always changes because we're dynamic and we always change. And the interesting thing about grief is it does too. Is what I feel in the moment that it occurs, and what I feel 6 months later, and what I feel 2 years later is different. I develop a different perspective about it, even in regards to all of those stages that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross talks about. Anger is experienced right after differently than it is experienced 2 years later, or any of those things, which means that if it's that thoroughly unique to that person, then again, you better start with, help me understand what's going on here, okay? So with big T truth, at least when it comes to grief, there are things that are universally true of everybody. The idea that they quote Revelation and say, well, in the end, God will wipe away every tear from our eyes. And he will put things right, and there will be no pain. All of those verses, guess what, are quoted at most funerals. Because the hope is meant to offset the pain right now. And the funny thing about it is, it's speaking to different parts of us. The hope that is described here is speaking to our heads. The pain that we're experiencing is speaking to our hearts. So you speak big T truth to people, great, good, just don't expect it to move much of the meter on somebody's heart. It's true, it is true. So all things work together for those who love them, love him. That creates even more bigger issues, because what about the people that don't? Or what about me that I don't in the moment? So there's a number of big T truths. Here's a couple more. I collected just a few of them. He or she is out of pain now. He or she is in a better place, whatever that is. Quotes. One day you'll see him or her again. See, a lot of platitudes we create actually just for the moment. So it's not stuff, it's not the kind of thing we plan. We go into it, and the moment somebody breaks the news of whatever that is, and I told you about the lady that I was talking to over the weekend that had, did I tell you guys this? Beg your pardon?
Did that make you feel better?
I don't know. The last 4 or 5 days have been a crap show, and it seems like if I were a superstitious person, I would feel like it's got to be because I'm teaching this class. It's got to be. Of course, it's just because of proximity. But I was talking to a lady over the weekend, former friend, works at World Venture, the mission agency I used to be with. And literally, this is not figurative. You say, well, somebody died at work. And you say, oh, who? And you think, well, it wasn't at work. Well, in this case, it was at work. She checked on her, and the lady said, I'm just having a spell, dizzy spell or whatever. Checked on her again, and she was still breathing kind of odd. And they called the paramedics, and by the time they got down a set of stairs, those are it's 2 flights of stairs. It's very similar to that one. By the time they got to the bottom of the stairs with her in the stretcher, she was unconscious. And by the time they got her to the hospital, she had already coded in the ambulance on the way there. So I got that news. And then I got the same news from the same lady that her sister had been diagnosed with liver cancer. And then I got hit 2 more times over, thank goodness for football, it was my only reprieve. I got hit 2 more times on Tuesday, and then I got hit again on Monday. It feels like I've gotten hit by a train. And when you have people saying these platitudes, and in her case, she had people saying that about her sister and about what happened. And I really can't. She's a good friend. I cannot describe to you how helpless I felt. And you would think for somebody like me, I've been doing this for a long time, why do you feel helpless? And it's like the insurmountable, indescribable pain she was in was just impossible to watch. It was just impossible to watch. I understand why people want to find something to say. And because we don't like feeling that helpless. And guess what? The person who's talking about it doesn't either. And that helplessness feels a little differently when they're not alone. And so we communicate things with a look. We communicate things with, things like, I'm so sorry. I mean, sorry, it doesn't quite cut it. It seems like a very shallow, word that we use kind of all the time. But I can't be in her sorrow, but I can sure share it. And a lot of times these platitudes, I have said this in other contexts, these platitudes are not for the person. They're for me, and I think ultimately that's why people that are grieving and have had a loss, that's why they feel so alone. Is that they're surrounded with words. They're marinated in the words in their head too. So adding to them is not necessarily going to make that big of a difference. We would like them to be, and actually we might even get belligerent enough to say, well, they should matter, because if you're a good enough Christian, then indeed these words should matter. And then I'd say go back to Job again. Yeah, Rose.
So when someone's in grief and you're with them, obviously you said you can't be in their sorrow, but you can share it.
Yeah.
I feel like most of us probably would say we're pretty empathetic.
Mm-hmm.
So how have you learned to balance feeling for them and feeling with them?
You're stealing my thunder. We will get to that. I think the quick answer to it is the resisting the temptation to find the right thing to say. That would be resisting that temptation. We'll get into the prepositions in a minute, but I have grown to in hearing stories like that. The one kind of guiding principle would be when somebody's talking about feelings, reflect feelings back. When somebody's talking about facts, reflect facts back. Sooner or later, they will be ready to tell the story. And that's when you can ask the kinds of questions maybe you're curious about. Sometimes, depending on the relationship, they will just tell the story themselves. Now, realize something. When somebody tells a story, this is their way to incorporate it into their reality. Even years later. I mean, that's kind of the hallmark of old people, right? You go to visit grandmother or whomever, and they're always telling you the same stories over and over again. You say, I already heard that one. It's, yeah, but they're re-saying it because they're incorporating it into the new reality of where they are now. And they need to tell the story. And it's embedded in us. It really is. I mean, before Scripture and everything else, it was all oral. It was like, gather around the campfire, kids. Let's talk about your great-great-uncle Jacob. So we are storytellers. We are. And that's how we make sense of things, but that's also how we assimilate them into the reality of where we are now. Yes, Sierra.
So I'm kind of struggling to not understand, but walk that line of using the Christianese phrases, but also pointing someone to God for comfort.
Mm-hmm.
Because in situations of loss and grief, God is the only one that can do the healing and the comforting.
Right.
And so how I just don't know how to explain it. It's if someone's sick, this is the only medicine that works, but also they might not want to take the medicine. It's how do you?
Yeah.
God's the only one that can help, but also how do you?
In the big T sense.
Yeah. How do you say the cliche things hello?
We have a soundtrack every morning, it seems. Yeah, I mean, even when you say pointing to God, I mean, we've got our own kind of lexicon that we use around that. So how do I point to God? Let me dig a little deeper. Yeah, I'll talk over it. Yeah, right. Don't ruin the mood. I think when we talk about pointing to God, usually we think of the words that I say to point to God. I think that's a lot of times what and that's just, like I said, that's just what Job's counselors were doing. They were anchoring him, literally, anchoring him in the big T truth. What was his response? They went around and around and around, and he was saying, yeah, that doesn't help, in so many words. So what does help? And what does help is not trying to correct with words or point to God with words, but to embody God in that situation and let him take care of the rest. Is that pointing to God? Yeah, I think it is. And so we always think of words. We always think of words, And I think that also kind of ties us up into little knots, because if I say the wrong words, then somehow I'm going to make it worse. But pointing, my friend walked away from our interaction. I didn't talk very much at all about God being the ultimate healer, and she was bombarded with that. She worked at a Christian organization, for crying out loud. And she felt guilty and even a bad Christian because she wasn't able to accept those words at that point. And so I wasn't talking about that much at all. But what did I display? I displayed grace. I displayed compassion. I displayed patience. I displayed all of those things. And I think we always get stuck on the words piece. So now, is there a time to do that? Yes, there is. If I'm talking to somebody that knows that stuff, I can kind of test the waters at times and say, you probably already know this. And if they say, yes, I do, then go on. Don't beat a dead horse. It doesn't get any deader. Grief, never mind. Anyway, so I think that's kind of the finesse of it. And again, it's facts to facts and feelings to feelings. When somebody's talking about feelings, don't crank out the reminder about Big T truth. That's wrong timing. And you know, you've heard me say this, all of you guys have heard me say this. An ill-timed truth is experienced like a weapon. That's how it's experienced. You say, well, it's not meant that way. I don't care. So it'd be like tapping somebody on the shoulder with a really sharp sword. And the sword can cut. And I've used that metaphor in the book where it's this psychological burn wound. And what does burns do to us? It burns off the skin and exposes the tissue. So imagine for a moment you walking around without any skin on. And somebody just comes up and goes, and you scream in pain, and they're saying, what are you having such a hard time with? I'm just tapping you. And so I think we have to be mindful more of that. There's not an exact line because it ends up being determined in the relationship with somebody else. So does that get close? Okay. Yeah.
I was just going to ask, just like a clarifying, because that was like a big topic.
Yeah.
Basically, can you just show the love of God through just sitting with them and just like listening? Basically, is that probably the best way to do it? Situations are different. I get that.
Yeah, and I think that, again, I think some of it is our words betray that we don't trust God just by our presence. So we add all these extra words so that it becomes that. And so, even being present in the face of somebody's unmitigated, uncontrollable, overwhelming pain and saying very little is the love of God. Because, it takes a lot of courage to do that, really, is to enter into somebody's pain like that. So, yeah.
I don't know if this is a question or a comment, but
Okay, we'll figure it out together, huh?
Yeah.
Okay.
I was talking to a friend the other day, and she had just had a really bad day, and she talked to her roommate before she came to me. And her roommate was kind of just like doing the Big T truths with her.
Yeah.
But she was when she was talking to me about it, she was like, "Yeah, I really I didn't want to hear it, but I really needed it."
Right.
Which I was like, well, I didn't say anything about this stuff, but I'm just curious how, I don't know, we justify that. I think when people give us the big teacher, it's like we should need it, even though we don't at that time.
Yes, and I think some of that goes to the socialization we've done, even in the Christian community. So that I should need it, is kind of like, well, that's what it's like my friend feeling guilty because she had people saying truths to her, and she wasn't in a place to be able to hear it. So the thing I think we have to be mindful of, if we're going to avoid that unintended insensitivity, is, well, yeah, hang on to that. I'm gonna put an ellipse, which I'm known for, and and I get to another point, and that is one of the features of a lot of grief groups is a Kleenex box, right? Usually because there's a fair number of tears. One of the not ironclad rules, but one of the spoken rules of that is when somebody is crying, you do not hand them Kleenex. Why? Because you're implicitly saying, whether you think you are or not, stop crying. So the same thing is true with that, I think, is being mindful of that when I start speaking truth, is it truth? Yes, of course it's truth. But it's also cutting somebody off at the knees and saying, stop that, just focus on the truth and everything will be fine. Now, are we actually saying that? No, of course not. But my attempt in trying to talk through this stuff is to help you be sensitive to the person that you're interacting with. That's all. I'm not trying to give you chapter and verse and formulas or anything else like that. It's just, how do you hear me say this all the time, how do you meet people where they are? Well, you start with their material, not yours, and then start the conversation after that. So and we've been all conditioned. I think, like I said, in the Christian community, we've all been conditioned. So when somebody speaks truth over us, we say, oh yeah, I should, yeah, okay, yep, absolutely. And it's like, yeah, I'll get to that later, which really is in Christianese saying, leave me alone, and I'm not ready for that yet. I mean, imagine for a moment if you look, somebody said that to you at any point in time, any loss, and you look them in the eye and say, not now. And they say, well, I'm just trying to help. And then it's like, who gets to determine whether you're helping or not? Me. Not you. Yeah, JC. Okay, go ahead. She was right behind you, Lindsay. Yeah, that's okay.
I was just going to say, I struggle with a line because sometimes I feel like, especially when I'm struggling, all I want is some sort of like words. Because like I have a lot of friends who are like, where they'll like sit with me, but then I'm like, I need something. Like I can't just like, I don't want you just here, you know? And I don't know if that's because I don't like to deal with my emotions, so that I'm like, okay, if you tell me something, that's something I can hold on to.
Yeah, or react to.
Yeah, or like do something about. But
Sure.
I don't know if that's just how.
Yeah, and I you know, a lot of the stuff that's probably leaping to people's minds is even as I'm talking about this is a little bit like you're doing, and that is, I need some context here and words provided for. So, I mean, let's be really clear. I'm not trying to prohibit saying anything, and if you do that, now you're wrong. And I do say it. I said something wrong, or whatever. So, but I think, you know, the example. I think in that part would be the question about, tell me more about how it feels to you, or asking the kinds of open-ended questions that allows them to answer it. Okay, do you feel is not a question, because you're labeling it for them. They don't get to define it for themselves. So asking the kind of open-ended questions that allows them to do all the defining, and in that case, you know, some of the stuff that we'll be talking about next week, when we start talking about mile markers of grief and things like that, that equips you with the kind of questions of, so what does it mean to you? Because it's not, how do you feel, which I think is a legitimate question. Tell me more about how you're feeling, which is open-ended. It's not really it's more of a statement of sorts, or but a lot of times the things that people wrestle with and have a hard time articulating is the impact that it has had on them, the meaning that it has for them. So when I lose somebody, even in a relationship, I not only lose them, I lose the role that I was in the relationship. I lose kind of definitions. Sometimes I lose peer groups. I lose lots and lots of things. So doing some of the thinking ahead because when anybody talks about losing a person, whatever that is, they tend to focus only on the person. So the questions you ask can be, so what's the bigger impact? What else do you lose by losing this person? And so that prompts a little bit more processing. Now, there are places along the way, I think, that rather than going to a hope-based platitude, which is usually what those are, we can instead kind of go to, gosh, I really understand. I see it. I understand how bad this can be. And there were lots of times as I was sitting talking to that lady that, bless you, that I had little to say. It was like, that's awful. And sometimes the words that I can choose amp up and kind of capture really the emotions that they have, but they're not using the words. One of the biggest challenges when you're talking about feelings is the person's feeling vocabulary. They don't have words to describe it. And listening to find the ways of describing it for them actually cracks open a door for them to talk more about it. I'll give you another example. Last night, my daughter is involved with a conduct disordered adolescent. Some of you in her group may hear a little bit about her journey with this kid. And I got home late. She and my wife's a teacher, so she's worked with these kids a lot. And they were having a long conversation, and I kind of walked in the middle of the movie. and so I made whatever I was going to eat. I sat down, I started listening, and the more I listened, the more I began to realize that Corey, as an intern, okay, mind that point, okay? An intern is being asked by the parent to talk to the school for her. And I'm sitting there listening to this, and for one, it's like, my blood starts getting hotter and hotter because my daughter has been placed in this position as an intern, not a professional. And the more I talk, the more my head kind of starts mapping things. And I got to this. They got to this point, and they kind of paused, and my wife got distracted, and I said, "So what you're saying is that you're caught in a triangulated communication." She has that word. I know she knows how to use it, but when she's caught in the middle of it, she can't really see that, and that kind of unlocked a bigger conversation, which actually allowed her to understand how she could take herself out of that. I think in grief and loss, it's exactly the same way. And so one of the most favorite handouts I give to people that are grieving is a feeling sheet. And everybody hates it. Because we have a truncated vocabulary around the areas that we like the least. So, Geraldine.
I am listening to this. I'm like, oh shoot, I had a conversation with someone. I said the wrong thing. And one of the things that I'm not sure how to approach the situation is I had a younger cousin who was grieving the loss of her first boyfriend, and they broke up. And she was like, what do I do to fix this pain? How can I distract it? How can I, what do I do to cope? And I felt like I was trying to think of things oh, maybe try running, maybe try journaling, little things that really aren't going to help, maybe put a temporary Band-Aid. But what do you tell someone when they want to know a solution or how to, something that they can tangibly do? Yeah, well, and I think actually, I probably disagree with you on journaling or taking a walk or things like that. I actually, they help.
because they drain off a lot of the energy that is around the pain. But essentially, I think, we are always asking for a solution to being human. And I'm not sure I can help them on that.
But do you think telling them like, oh, try running is like oversimplifying their pain and like saying this will fix it?
Well, the latter part of that statement, and this will fix it. Okay? There's nothing wrong at all and entirely helpful for somebody to take a walk or go for a run or journal what they're feeling or put in that journal what they wish they could have said or things like that. Absolutely. Is it going to fix it? It depends on how we're going to define what fixing is. and what is it that we're fixing? I saw a little graphic the other day, and the graphic basically said, grief occupies the space, or let's see, how did that go? I think grief occupies a space where love has been. So grief and love are connected, and when you read the quote from C.S. Lewis about the soul of love is vulnerability, and vulnerability by definition is the capacity to be wounded. So those things tend to be kind of connected. So, and I don't, we will always, I think when we're around people, what do they say when we're in pain? Make it stop. That's diplomatic. Make it stop. And it's like, I can't. Now, we can talk, and it makes it a little bit easier to walk with it, having somebody to talk about and vent and everything else. I think sooner or later, the lady I talked to over the weekend, I'm going to hear a lot of anger. Not only at herself, but also the paramedics. The paramedics did a lousy job at assessing this woman, and they were going to cart her off to Parker, and the headquarters for World Venture is in Centennial. So they assessed her as not critical at all. And then when they got to the bottom of the stairs, it's like, we got to get her to Sky Ridge, because it's way, way, way closer. So that'll happen, and we cycle through those things. And sometimes it's helpful after an interaction to say, look, this is probably going to happen. And so when that happens, keep talking. Let's talk some more, or write it down, or so I can listen to it or whatever. Okay? Yeah, Abby.
So with the idea that you're saying of like suggesting like, oh, that's awful, like giving them feelings that they might be feeling. What if we're wrong, and like, not wrong necessarily, but I can see it as being like detrimental in the other sense. Like, no, that's not what I'm feeling. You've never experienced it. You don't get it. You
Right.
know, like, how do we?
But see, follow down that path.
Right.
Actually, you probably gain more by being wrong than you do by being right. Because why? They get mad. Well, now we're getting a little closer to what's really going on here. So I diminish, and again, this comes from long experience of talking to people, and there are lots of times where I have been wrong in labeling things, and because of the nature of the relationship we've had, they say, no, that's not even close. It's like, okay, tell me. Help me understand. And actually, it creates this motivation to be better understood, and so they find more words with it. And that's being able to take somebody's anger, like you said, on the backside. You don't understand. You don't get it. All that. There's only one response to that. You're right. I don't. You got other?
Yeah, my fear, and I get that, like, in helping someone, like, it's not about me at all. Like,
Right.
I'm not trying to make it about me. But, like, my fear is that they're gonna write me off. Like, I wanna help them and like be the person that's there for them. And I don't want them to like write me off as like, they don't get it, I'm not gonna talk to them about this anymore.
Right.
You know, like,
That's the chance,
you
right?
can't control that. But,
Yeah, that's the next topic.
yeah, okay.
Yes, here.
So I'm like hung up on a technicality, so bear with me.
Okay.
But like my brain is just playing devil's advocate this morning to everything.
Oh, well, thanks for the warning.
Yeah, you have been warned. So the tissue thing, of all things, like, that annoys me, that it's like seen as being, here's a tissue, stop crying. When in reality, like, if someone's sneezing and you hand them a tissue, they're gonna be like, oh my gosh, they don't want me to sneeze. It's like, let me help you. It's like anticipating a need. And so I'm just kind of pissy to be that is so, like, how is that? I don't know. I know it's not about intention, like, because it can be received a certain way, but like,
Right. That's what we're talking about,
how?
is how it will be received.
But like, I wouldn't receive it that way.
But you're not the definition of somebody else's
I know,
pain.
and that's true, but I think I'm just hung up on like, I don't know. It just makes me nervous to help because it's like, well, if my intentions aren't good enough.
Okay. And don't globalize it.
Yes. to be
Okay.
fair.
So then we go to, well, I'm not going to do it at all.
Yeah.
And so the pendulum swings back and forth, and I'm overbearing and enmeshed and walk around with Kleenex for everybody that sneezes and everything else, versus, well, whatever, I get it wrong every time, so I'm just going to do nothing. Yeah, that's it. That's the problem, right? Is what makes for good balance in our relationships? Very simply, discernment. That's what makes it. So the rule, like I said, is not like it's, enforced by smacking somebody's hand when they. But it's there to remind people about when we cry, for example, we want to deny our weakness, which I would say is not really weakness, it's actually humanity. So we tend to equate those two things. And so, what is it doing? It's not only potentially communicating. It's not. We don't know. Okay, but potentially communicating to the person. Stop. It'll be okay. But there's also another kind of subtext to that, I think, and that is what the challenge of grief and loss is, that we're reminded just how out of control we are and helpless we are, which also raises the level of need we have. So where this is going is that somebody is crying and they look at somebody else and say, could you hand me a Kleenex? What is that? It's a validation of personal need. It doesn't make one needy. It's a validation of personal need. How do we engage this process of grief and loss? It's allowing our needs to exist and recognizing that I need some others to help me with some, and I can deal with some of the other ones myself. And it's that kind of dynamic kind of dance that goes on. So I hear you exactly. I hear you. I've heard that complaint over and over and over again. And it's like, and usually it's built on the pendulum swing. Is what is our primary motive? To not do something wrong or to not make something worse. When you're talking to somebody who has experienced a loss, you can't make it worse. You don't have that kind of power. And it again kind of turns this boomerang around to, I got to make sure you get it all right. I got to say all the right things. I got to do. And what? And what? Yeah. And we're assuming that actually it will. And quite honestly, it may not. Because you're trying to repair something that's inherent to us being human and loving people and being in relationships and stuff like that. You start that conversation that says, well, you should have just stayed out of the relationship anyway. Because that's really where we're coming down to. is, like I said in my own journey, I said, fine, if that's how this is going to go, I'm out. I am out of relationships, and it contaminated all the subsequent relationships thereafter until I resolved with embracing and living in my own humanity and my own, not weakness, but my acceptance of my humanity that comes with tears and all the other things that kind of put me out of control kind of stuff. Yeah.
So, how do you provide vocabulary for them to talk about without saying, do you feel? Because you were talking earlier about using open-ended questions.
Right. And sometimes the open-ended question is you add a new word for what it is they're feeling. So they say, I feel awful. And then I might reflect back and say, you know, it sounds like you're feeling just downright devastated. Well, now we're getting closer to probably what they're actually feeling. And I've substituted a different word than they're using in order to expand the universe of the things that they're talking about.
So should I go find a thesaurus?
No. You gotta, sometimes we have to build our own vocabulary. We have to build our own vocabulary. I think, like I said, on the website, I think it's in course resources. If you want to see what a feeling sheet looks like, you can download one. You might be really shocked at the number of feelings that are on there. It's somewhere near 100. Because our major categories of feelings, mad, sad, glad, bad, scared, have a range. They have a range. So when I'm mad, I can be mildly perturbed, or I can be rageful. The problem in a lot of cases, and even in our families, is a lot of our emotions are mislabeled. So when somebody gets angry, the other people or me feel like I'm losing it. I'm rageful. I'm whatever. And I've told, I think I've told some of you guys the story of the mom with two adolescents, and they reacted to her really strong emotions very, very differently. One called her hysterical, and the other called her upset. It's like, wait a minute, we're talking about the same person here. And it's how they experienced that, and that interferes then with developing some kind of vocabulary around feelings. And that's another part of it. So, yeah.
I guess I'm kind of confused because you said when someone's like, correct me if I'm wrong, but like if someone's grieving, what you say can't really make it worse.
Right.
But like, for example, I don't talk to my mom about any kind of grief because she says literally the worst thing. I'm like, you can't say anything that's going to make this worse. And then somehow she says the thing that makes me feel 10 times worse about the situation. So I know, like, if I'm upset,
It's possible.
Mom,
yeah, right.
So how do I protect myself from being that person for others that they go, oh, can't go to Geraldine because she's just going to make it worse? Does that make sense?
You resonating with that, are you? Other people are resonating by laughing about it.
It's not, if they want to go to someone else, like it's not up to us to pick like ourselves as the person that they go to.
Right.
But at the same time, it goes back to everything you've been saying about that feeling of helplessness. Like,
Right.
you can't even sit with them anymore. Like, literally, we're helpless. Like, at least.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, we're kind of talking about two different perspectives. I mean, you're talking about in the moment at the time, and I'm talking about probably a longer term perspective. All the entire overlay of the grieving process. I'm probably not making it worse. It feels like I am, but I mean, I'm painfully aware, being a parent, that because I have the history of my kids, I have a unique ability to point into places that they really would rather not know about. And I'm not a very collaborative person on that anyway. So you're right. I mean, I think some of it is kind of what's the context we're talking about here. And so, even in the overall picture, and usually that's how we think about that, right? I mean, we say, well, I don't want to make it worse. All right, well, let's define worse. And the worst part is a little bit like you're saying, Abby, is I don't want them to go away. I want to try to help. And it's like, wait a minute, am I willing to live with their decision that I'm not the person to help them right now? Am I willing to live with that? And I've had lots and lots of people that I think mistakenly want somebody to bludgeon them with the truth. And I ain't one of those people. And so, and when I sit and kind of reflect and expand and all that, they say, no. I want solutions here. I don't care about the feelings. It's like, go in peace, bye. And then they come back and say, this sucks, I feel awful. It's like, okay, now we can talk. And so what's the difference? Well, they've been pushed on their humanity, and the solutions don't fix their humanity. And so the conversation that we have around that, and emotions kind of take us to that place, more so than just our head cognitions kinds of stuff. Yeah, Sophia.
How do you remain empathetic when the grieving process lasts a lot longer than you expected?
Well, you probably have said more than you may have known. Because when we say longer than it's expected, then we better start defining our terms. Because anybody watching me talk about this in any of these classes I've done for the last 8 or 9 years, they would say, why are you still grieving? Why? Because there's tears. So grief can become complicated, okay? I'm not denying that. We've got complicated bereavement, and if somebody goes into loss with significant issues with depression or other things, they get exacerbated by grief and all of that. But I think the empathy piece is people have different timelines. And some of the models we're going to be talking about gives you a little bit of a perspective about how to be a little bit more patient with it. Because just like, just like sending somebody up to Fort Collins and letting them choose their route, if they're not from Colorado, some will take longer than others. Some will get completely lost, in spite of the fact it's due north. That's kind of what grief's like. And so at least for me, I tend to be less worried about how much time it takes. And allow for a lot of latitude in that particular area. So why? And some of it is, my motivation is, how can I may not be part of all of that journey, so how can I, on this part of the journey, meet them there? That's it. And I'm gonna kind of take out, if you will, the worry about how long this is taking and things like that. That question is one I get all the time. And some of it is somebody now is evaluating someone else's process and journey. And dangerous territory to be in, for sure. So, yeah.
This kind of goes along with that. Like, how can you be patient with yourself? Because I know personally, like, when I'm still grieving, but like,
yeah.
When I grieve, I'm like, why aren't you over this already? It's
right.
been however many years. Like, what's wrong with you? Like,
yeah.
You should be fine. It's like, I get being patient with others. I can do that.
Oh yeah.
For some reason, with myself, I'm like, what are you doing? So like, how can you be more patient with yourself and the ups and downs that you go through personally?
Right. And
if you have an answer for that, I don't know.
I do, but you guys keep stealing my thunder, for crying out loud. Just quit asking questions. Just stop, okay? Let me get through some of this stuff at least. But yeah, it's coming. It's coming. And if I don't answer it, then ask it again. I won't get annoyed or anything. So, all right. Wow. Okay. I never knew we were going to uncork this can of worms. Where am I going next? Okay, I lost track. So, big T truth. Now, and I already mentioned little T truth, okay? Little T truth is unique to me, entirely personal to me, and that landscape changes all the time. So I have to find some way when I'm talking to someone, and maybe even talking to myself, to admit that this is fungible, this is malleable, this changes. And so little T truth, I'm making a split that is a one of convenience, not one of gospel truth here. But I think we have to understand the kinds of truth that we engage in. I have a truth about me that's not applicable to you. And there are universal truths we live by, even within the Christian community. So confusion, fear, doubt, disorientation, disillusionment, the whole list goes on. And in any given day, and in any given hour, and maybe in any given minute. Really. Because it started to dawn on me when I got home on Tuesday. It started to dawn on me. I had gotten hit a number of times with people's pain, and I wasn't paying very good attention to it at all. And so as I started reflecting, and a lot of times my truck is kind of a moving decontamination chamber. And I roll things over in my mind in terms of interactions with people and the things that I've said and those sorts of things. And I got home and I looked at my wife and said, I realized where I've been. And it's been in my head with a lot of other people's pain, and I've got to figure out how to unpack that again. And so all of those things are part of it. You know, one of the probably most profound things that is in the book, if you guys are in clinical counseling methods and reading The Making of a Therapist, one of the most profound things in that book is the idea that therapists, counselors, whomever, experience confusion and doubt about what they do. Did I say it right? Just like you're asking questions. Should I say it a different way? Am I really the person for the job? Those are all there. They're all there. And that's very much a part of what? The little T truth. Demos may not have those thoughts, he does. I throw him under the bus on a regular basis on that point. All of your faculty members do, every time. Part of the biggest hurdle I had to get over was this thing. Because when I go back and watch this, it's my game tape. And I look and I just tear everything up. It's like, why'd you have to say it that way? And at some point, I began to realize that it leveraged me doing this and looking and watching what I say, actually leverages to your benefit. And then I was more than happy to watch it because it benefited somebody. Does it benefit me? Yeah, of course, it does. So, little T truth, I've mentioned Job over and over again. Look at him to understand. This is one of his responses. Again, it's out of the Message. Where's the strength to keep my hopes up? What future do I have to keep going? Do you think I have nerves of steel? Do you think I'm made of iron? Do you think I can pull myself up by my bootstraps? I don't even have boots. I just love that phrase. It's like, boots, you gotta have some boots to do this bootstrap thing. That's just how despairing he was. And so we've got a few more minutes. I got a couple other quotes I wanted to share with you from Brennan Manning. He wrote a book, Ruthless Trust. And there are a couple quotes out of that are anchored in this little T truth idea, okay? And this is the first one. How difficult for me to sing that song. Forever I will sing the goodness of the Lord. when a morning phone call delivered the news that my 41-year-old friend Rich Mullins had been killed in a gruesome auto accident just a few hours earlier. Without explanation, I turned down several requests to speak at memorial services. I was lost in the tangled, dark, and frightening inner world of my grief, doubt, fear, and anger over Rich's death. And Brennan was indelibly marked with Rich's death. He was indelibly marked. It changed a lot of his teaching after. And a lot of it was the wrestling that he did, the tangled, dark, and frightening inner world of my grief that he talks about. So there's the big T truth. There's the little T truth. Okay? Here's one more example. Taste and see the goodness of the Lord. How hard for Ann Donovan when she delivered a stillborn baby. She said, those things I had relied on, modern science, women's intuitions, God's mercy, had failed and I had nothing to hold on to. When friends offered well-meaning words of condolence, such as it was God's will, we cannot understand God's will, and told her how privileged she should feel that now she has her very own baby angel, the only taste in her mouth was ashes. And see, the one thing that is a buffer for you trying to meet people that are experiencing loss is authenticity about yourself. To say, I have no words for what I'm hearing from you. I don't know how to respond. That's not making it about you. But guess what? You've just probably communicated how they're feeling. And in doing so, you've invited them into community to have this conversation about such things. So, okay. Any questions? Leap up, run, bye.
But 5 minutes late.
Oh, it is?
So every time we go 5 minutes late.
Oh, I did not know that.
Like looking at their phones 'cause-
I'm so
but
sorry.
it's fine. I just
Yeah.
wanted to tell you
Thank
so
you for
nice.
thanks for letting me know.
Thank you.
Yep.